To understand why Elias Vaughn visited the decaying grandeur of the Prescott family estate, Caleb always made a point to be there, observing from a side chair. He listened with more focus than he ever granted Elias's uncle during his political science lectures at Georgetown. This time, Elias arrived with his sister, Ilara. His gaze swept over Caleb, cool and distant, noting how the bright colors of Caleb's sweater stood out, likening him to one of Senator Ashworth's peacocks roaming the manicured lawns of the family compound. A flicker of amusement crossed Caleb's face. In the past, he would have taken the comment as an insult. But things were different now. If Elias was truly interested in him, then any comment on his appearance was a compliment. If Elias found him eye-catching, then his interest must be real. Caleb's father, oblivious, clapped him on the shoulder with a hearty laugh, explaining that his son had simply dressed up in excitement for their guests. The force of the blow made Caleb see stars, but it only solidified the brilliant, if flawed, logic forming in his mind. He silently judged Elias for having feelings for someone so young. Even if Caleb had initiated the kiss, he wondered if Elias hadn't subtly provoked it. Elias gave a curt nod, his voice flat as he mentioned that Theodore Ashworth had been asking about Caleb, concerned that he was falling behind in his studies. The suggestion that he should return to the Ashworth's inner circle was laughable. Everyone in their circle knew Caleb wasn't the academic type. Lines of poetry he memorized by lamplight would vanish from his memory by morning. To save his father some face, he'd once tried his hand at crafting his own verses. His first masterpiece, a poem about a deconstructed tomato soup, was still a running joke. His father, bless his heart, didn't understand the nuances of modern art and had proudly shared it with half of Washington, D.C. Now, everyone knew he and the senator's youngest son, Leo, were two of a kind. If Leo could propose a political strategy as foolish as a fox guarding a henhouse, Caleb could write a poem praising it. They were the matching bookends of mediocrity. Elias bringing it up now was a clear jab. Caleb glanced at Ilara and suppressed the urge to roll his eyes. It was poor form to be rude in front of her. But the last lingering shred of guilt he felt over their drunken kiss evaporated completely. What was done was done. If they were keeping score, Caleb felt he'd come out at a disadvantage anyway. He was, by any objective measure, far more handsome than Elias. So Elias had better just let it go. He lowered his gaze and politely informed Elias that he'd taken a leave of absence. Elias countered that the tutor hadn't approved it. Caleb thought to himself that he didn't care about approval. He was staying home, and they couldn't exactly drag him back to the capital. The eye contact became awkward, so he stared at a potted fern on the floor. Suddenly, a warm hand cupped his earlobe, a gentle squeeze sending a jolt through him. Elias leaned in close, his voice a low murmur meant only for him. He whispered that he knew the supposed sickness was just an excuse to skip his responsibilities. Caleb desperately wanted to shout that it was also an excuse to avoid him. And the ear thing was incredibly strange. He was his future brother-in-law, for God's sake. Instead, Caleb flinched back a step, mumbling his thanks for the reminder and promising he would be there tomorrow. He felt like a complete coward. On his 16th birthday, a crisis erupted overseas. His father, a decorated general in his youth, had retired to a life of quiet comfort after marrying his mother. Senator Ashworth dispatched him as a military observer. News traveled slowly from the remote conflict zone. It wasn't until the following year that they learned he was dead. The official report was vague, no recoverable remains. There were whispers that the troops were poorly equipped, their gear unable to stand up to the enemies. They were overrun in a surprise night raid, defenseless. Caleb couldn't understand where the money had gone. His family had poured their entire fortune into that defense contract. He asked questions, but no one would listen. The day he took over the family's accounts, not a single tear fell. The whole affair shocked the Capitol. Senator Ashworth appointed a special commission, and a wave of fear swept through the political establishment. They all had skeletons in their closets, and the senator knew it. But he'd waited for a body count before launching an investigation. The filth of politics always required a cleansing of blood, but Caleb couldn't understand why it had to be his family's. The investigation brought down hundreds of officials, from minor bureaucrats to major power players, uncovering everything from bribery to smuggling rings. It took a month of firings and resignations to clean house. As compensation, the senator offered them some token gifts and a minor title for Caleb. He also brought Caleb's aunt back from the political exile she'd been cast into. Caleb was filled with resentment but could only kneel and offer his thanks. He lived with extreme frugality. The next year, when the family business finally showed a small profit, he almost cried. He took the check, tucked it into his pocket, and after much deliberation, bought a single, expensive tube of lipstick from a brand currently trending in New York. Alara was 12 now, an age where she would start to care about such things. Even if he wasn't her future husband, he felt a brotherly duty to spoil her a little. He gave the lipstick to Alara, and her smile in return was worth everything. Elias saw the exchange and, without a word, took Caleb's vintage watch right off his wrist. Caleb didn't have the strength to argue, so he let it go. Not long ago, Senator Ashworth was furious. Details of his son Theodore's scandalous affair with a security detail agent had been leaked and turned into a trashy online serial titled The Senator's Son and His Secret Service Lover. Caleb shamefully had read it. Theodore, with his powerful backing, remained unbothered. He calmly deflected the attention by exposing his younger brother, Marcus. The senator had once been close to the powerful lobbyist Marcus was entangled with, a man he held in high regard, and the scandal's focus shifted immediately. Marcus became the sacrificial lamb, confined to the family estate. Theodore was ordered back to the capital for a 3-day reprimand. The incident reminded the aging senator, who had few heirs, of his youngest, simple-minded son, Leo. Good-looking but unintelligent, easily controlled and loyal, with a powerless maternal family, Leo posed no threat. Caleb's aunt was welcomed back into the senator's good graces, given a ceremonial position that looked like a promotion to outsiders. But when Caleb saw her recently, she was subdued, a shadow of her former vibrant self. He delivered a family letter to her as his grandfather had requested. Her smile was bleak as she told him his father's death was no accident, and that the senator had forgotten all the promises of their youth. Caleb told her not to be foolish. The senator was incapable of loving anyone but himself. This quiet stability was the best she could hope for. He helped her to a sofa, reminding her that she, of all people, should know what kind of man the senator was. She insisted that he'd promised never to harm the Prescott family. Caleb cut her off, explaining that using others to do his dirty work was how he maintained balance. Their family had become too prominent, and after they fell, they became a convenient target. He tried to reassure her, promising that with him there, the family would be fine. The Prescott name was now an empty shell, a gilded exterior hiding rot. He needed money, a lot of it. He had to network, to force smiles with the sons of the elite, and to support the 30-odd people still depending on the estate. Using an alias, he and the butler started a small online business. It brought in a little cash, most of which went to his mother's medical bills. Her health had declined sharply after his father's death, and her life was sustained by expensive treatments. Leo, showing a flicker of maturity, would sometimes sneak valuable items out of the compound for him, writing notes urging him not to work so hard. Caleb pawned the items for a significant profit. He had made some money, but his obligations kept him tied to home. He looked around the empty estate, unsure of what to do next. The chrysanthemums in the courtyard were in full bloom, their heavy, golden heads weighing down the branches, filling the air with a sense of oppressive beauty. The annual political retreat was held at a hunting lodge in the Catskills, an event attended by all the major D.C. families. Caleb went, but he couldn't even draw a bow, which earned him a round of mockery. Annalise Ashworth's laughter was the loudest. Spurred by anger, he tried again. Perhaps desperation unlocked some hidden strength, because he managed to pull the string taut. He felt the searing stares of those around him and realized with horror that he had no idea how to aim. A hand covered his. He flinched. Elias's voice was calm, telling him not to tremble. Caleb did as he was told, aligning his eye with the arrow and the target. Elias asked if he was ready. He thought so. Elias told him to release. The arrow flew true, striking the bullseye. The crowd dispersed with murmurs of surprise. Caleb managed a thank you. Elias just nodded, his expression indifferent. As Caleb caught his breath, Annalise stormed over, dabbing at her face with a silk handkerchief. She called him useless, needing Elias's help for everything. Caleb, unbothered, replied that he was shameless, and she was only just now figuring that out. Annalise sputtered that he was incorrigible. He shook his head, lamenting that some people were beyond teaching. She shot back with a sneer about his ridiculous deconstructed tomato soup. He forced a smile, correcting her that it was an essence of heirloom tomato with an egg white foam. She asked what the difference was. He fell silent for a moment before telling her to mind her own business. Suddenly, she began waving her hands frantically, crying out his name, complaining that her eyes hurt. He asked what was wrong. She wailed that a bug had flown into her eye. He grabbed her wrist, telling her to hold still before she scratched his face. She urged him to hurry. He asked her to open her eye. She couldn't. He threw her own insult back at her, calling her useless, then gently pried her eyelid open, telling her to stay still while he blew. She sobbed that her makeup was ruined. He told her she looked the same either way. Her tears washed the insect out. Annalise, clutching her handkerchief, her eyes red from crying, looked oddly vulnerable. A blush spread across her cheeks. She shoved the tear-stained handkerchief into his hand and said, with a flustered air, that her birthday was coming up and he'd better get her something good. He reminded her she'd just had one. He wasn't getting her anything. She stamped her foot, ran a few steps, then turned back, insisting that he had to. He looked down at the handkerchief in his hand, utterly bewildered. The serious players were out hunting game. Caleb, lacking the skill, waited in the main tent. Senator Ashworth presided over the evening's awards, praising everyone but him before dismissing the crowd. Caleb found Elias and helped him dress a rabbit he'd caught. As dusk fell, a bonfire was lit in front of the main tent. Caleb tore off a piece of roasted rabbit for Elias. Annalise watched Elias with adoring eyes, asking for a piece herself. Caleb told her to get her own. As he began to eat, Elias cut a piece and offered it to her on the tip of his knife. Annalise beamed, saying that Elias was the best. Annoyed, Caleb whined to Elias that he wanted some too. Elias raised an eyebrow and tore off a large piece for him, telling him to speak properly. Seeing that Elias was in a good mood, Caleb grew bolder and mimicked Annalise's tone, cooing his name. Later that night, drowsy from wine, Caleb was sleeping soundly. A commotion erupted nearby, but he paid it no mind, simply rolling over and incorporating the sounds into his dream. A sudden chill on his neck woke him. It was a draft. He opened his eyes to see Elias hauling him out of the tent. He asked what was happening. Elias pulled him by the hand and told him there was a security breach. They ran. Theodore and his security agent were just behind them. The agent, held tightly by Theodore, looked worriedly back, asking what about the senator. Theodore scoffed that their own lives were more important. After running for what felt like an eternity, Elias brought them to a stop. The agent built a fire, and the four of them huddled around it. The cold wind made Caleb's nose run. Thankfully, he still had Annalise's handkerchief. Though it had been used for tears, he was in no position to be picky about using it for his nose. Elias glanced over and asked where he got it. Caleb, half-dazed, mumbled that it was Annalise's. Elias snatched it away and threw his own at him. A strange feeling pricked at Caleb. He asked if Elias had a thing for Annalise. Elias draped his heavy coat over Caleb's shoulders and stated flatly that he did not. Caleb mumbled an "oh" and said he was hungry. The agent stood up to find some food, but Caleb quickly said it wasn't necessary. He was just trying to change the subject. Besides, it was obvious the agent and Theodore were more than just colleagues. Theodore waved a lazy hand, telling the agent to go, remarking that his partner was an excellent cook. Caleb covered his ears, not wanting to hear any more. The agent's ears turned red, and he turned to leave, but Theodore grabbed his arm, saying he would go with him. They walked off together, Theodore practically draped over the other man. Elias asked if he was cold. Caleb sniffled and wrapped his arms around Elias's waist, admitting that he was. Elias stiffened, asking what he was doing. Caleb pouted that Elias was being stingy, not even letting him have a hug. He then said Elias must have figured it out too. That wasn't a random breach earlier. Elias didn't move. He knew it was an assassination attempt, orchestrated by Marcus. Caleb said it didn't matter to him. They weren't after him anyway. Elias gripped his shoulders, calling him naive. Staring into the crackling flames, Caleb's voice was low. He said whatever they did had nothing to do with him. He didn't want to be involved in any of it. At dawn, the air was crisp and cold. Annalise ran towards him, tears streaming down her face. She grabbed his hands, distraught that her brother Marcus could attempt a coup. Caleb tried to calm her down, telling her that Theodore had Marcus in custody and he would take her to them. He led her into the main tent, where Elias and Theodore were playing chess, looking as serene as if nothing had happened. Elias, holding a black piece, glanced up at them and asked if the princess had come to see her brother. Theodore stated coolly that Marcus had tried to assassinate their father, stabbing him. The wound was severe. The old man probably didn't have much time left. He added with a cynical smirk that Marcus had always been too impatient. Annalise pleaded with Theodore, reminding him they'd grown up together, and he must know Marcus wasn't that kind of person. Theodore laughed, saying his belief was irrelevant. He summoned his agent, phone, and told him to take Annalise to see Marcus, adding that it might be her last chance. Annalise thanked him. As she left with the agent, Caleb saw no reason to stay either. He bowed, saying he had matters to attend to and would take his leave. Theodore stopped him, asking if he was of age soon. He tossed a white chess piece into the bowl, a sly smile playing on his lips. He said he had chosen a new middle name for him, Caspian, like the sea. Elias commented that it was a fine name. Caleb smiled and agreed. Theodore lamented that Caleb had grown distant, not at all like the innocent, adoring boy from their childhood. He turned to Elias, who simply stated that Caleb should thank him for the honor. Caleb knelt, expressing his gratitude, but explained that his late father had already chosen a middle name for him. He looked Theodore in the eye and said it was a family name. Theodore feigned surprise that the late general's choice would be so contrary to his own. He propped his chin on his hand and asked Elias lazily what he thought. Elias glanced at Caleb, suggesting that if the honor was unwelcome, it was best to let it be. Caleb lowered his head, apologizing for any unintended offense. Theodore waved it away, changing the subject. There was unrest with a rival European conglomerate. They were draining resources, so they wanted to propose a merger, sealed with a symbolic union. He mused that someone would have to escort the bride. After the deal was done, it would be a major accomplishment. He decided Annalise would be the one to go, since she was unattached anyway. Caleb was shocked. Annalise? He tried to argue, asking about the senator's approval. Everyone in D.C. knew she was the senator's favorite niece. Unless Theodore was doing this deliberately, Theodore assured him he would handle their father. He then added, a sharp edge to his voice, that the general was still buried overseas. Surely Caleb wanted to do his duty as a son. Caleb dug his nails into his palm, the words coming out strained. He thanked Theodore for the opportunity. He looked to Elias for help, but instead met Theodore's piercing gaze from the head of the table. Theodore dismissed him, saying he was tired. Caleb was to leave with Annalise after the new year. Back in the capital, life seemed to return to normal. The only change was the news from the senator's office that he was in poor health, with Theodore taking over his duties. There was no word on Marcus. He had simply vanished. Annalise grew distant from Theodore, becoming closer to Leo instead. Elias, meanwhile, had apparently fallen out of favor with Theodore and was now spending his time at Caleb's estate, ostensibly for a quiet retreat. He brought Ilara with him, and Annalise followed her. Annalise declared loudly that she had always thought Caleb was a complete airhead, but was surprised to learn he was a budding entrepreneur. It seemed everyone knew about his secret business venture. She told him not to worry, that being a businessman was great because you could travel. Her greatest wish was to see the world. She held out her hand, demanding the same lipstick he had bought for Ilara. He joked that she had plenty of expensive things and wouldn't want his cheap trinkets, adding that she couldn't compare to Ilara anyway. Elias watched him, his stare so intense it made Caleb's skin crawl. Finally, Elias spoke, his voice low and sharp, calling it a delusion. Annalise playfully punched Caleb's arm, calling him an ungrateful wolf after she'd found a top specialist for his mother. Caleb immediately apologized, promising to find her some rare gift soon. Ilara, older now and aware of propriety, kept her distance. Annalise, however, ran wild through the house with Ilara, marveling at the few remaining treasures. Elias followed Caleb as he wandered the grounds. Caleb found a gazebo to rest and played a few moves of chess with Elias. Elias, his eyes on the board, dropped a bombshell. He suggested Caleb could marry him, and then he wouldn't have to go on the difficult trip to Europe. It would be like being Ilara's brother-in-law, but by marrying him instead. The scene felt strangely familiar. He asked why. Elias raised his eyes from the board, nonchalant, and asked if Caleb didn't have feelings for him. The absurdity of it was staggering. Before Caleb could accuse him of being a closeted gay man trying to drag his straight friend down with him, Elias had preempted him. His blood boiled. He fought the urge to roll his eyes and calmly refused, stating that he liked Elias's sister. Elias said that brotherly affection was still a form of affection. Then he asked what the kiss that night had been about. Caleb retorted that it was probably because Elias looked a lot like his sister. Elias let out a humorless laugh, asking if Caleb was serious. Alara was 9 at the time. Caleb mumbled an "oh," telling him to just assume he had a thing for kids. He was sorry, Alara. Elias sneered and said his name. Caleb replied coolly, asking what intelligence Theodore had sent him to gather this time. He had already said all he was going to say and had accepted the assignment. What more did they want? Did they want him to end up dead like his father to settle some political score? Or perhaps they wanted to marry him off like Annalise. He said bitterly that at least those foreign powers were more open-minded about male spouses. With that, he was done talking. He stood to leave, but Elias stood too, grabbing his wrist and pulling him into an embrace. The winter air was cold, and their breath mingled in a white cloud before dissipating. For a moment, Caleb was too stunned to move. Elias gently stroked his brow, his voice soft. He said Theodore hadn't sent him. He had come on his own. Caleb pushed him away, asking what that had to do with him. He turned, only to see Annalise standing 10 feet away. He had no idea how much she'd heard. Her face was calm, but tears streamed down her cheeks, her eyes locked on his. She asked if what they had just said was true. A lump formed in Caleb's throat, and he couldn't speak. Elias walked past him, toward Annalise, and asked to speak with her privately. His mother's health improved, and she began arranging suitors for him, the daughters of every prominent family in D.C. were paraded before him, but his mother was relentless, insisting he choose someone so he could marry as soon as he came of age. It took hours of arguing before she finally let him be. The city was still recovering from the New Year festivities, but the red, white, and blue decorations on every house gave it a sense of cheerful patriotism. On Theodore's orders, Caleb set out with Annalise for Europe. The wheels of their car crushed the remnants of holiday confetti into the hard-packed snow. They traveled for 2 months, and Annalise didn't say a single word. Sometimes, when they stopped for a meal, she would stare at the sky, and a tear would trace a path from the corner of her eye. The days were monotonous. Drive, eat, drive, rest. The journey was rough, the constant motion and poor food leaving him with a persistent cough. One sunny day, they came across a clear pond and decided to make camp. A staff member brought him some fish soup. He ladled some for Annalise, trying to lighten the mood. He reminded her how she used to be such a tomboy, always trying to dive into any body of water, once dragging him in with her. Elias had been the one to pull him out. Annalise managed a small smile, which quickly turned into tears. He asked why she was crying. He was the one who should be crying. He'd been sick for 3 days with a fever after that, and his father hadn't even had the heart to scold him. He cleared his throat and admitted that he'd been terrified of water ever since. If he didn't have to drink it to survive, he wouldn't have stopped here. He sighed, saying he sometimes envied her boundless energy. She was a better man than he was. After a long silence, Annalise finally spoke. She said she didn't want to go through with the deal. He replied that on her birthday she'd asked for a gift, and he wanted to give it to her now. He placed a small, worn coin in her hand and told her he would go in her place. On the night of the formal merger ceremony, his heart pounded in his chest. His hands trembled as he lifted the veil of the person before him. It wasn't the bride. It was his brother-in-law. Elias, who had always been at odds with him, tilted his chin up slightly. "Husband," he said. Caleb stared. "Oh," he managed. Elias just looked at him. Caleb said, He calmly pulled the veil back down. He must have been mistaken. A second later, Elias grabbed his hand and pulled the veil off again, a cold smile on his face. We've been in bed together countless times. A little late to be mistaken now, don't you think? As the sole heir to the Prescott legacy, Caleb was destined to inherit a title and little else. Over the years, he hadn't accomplished much beyond mastering the art of being agreeable. So, he followed his family's wishes and agreed to marry his childhood friend, Alara Vaughn. From a strategic perspective, it was a political alliance. He was fond of Alara. She was gentle and kind, not sharp and mocking like her brother. She was also talented, making him little woven grasshoppers and crickets, unlike her brother, who only ever offered him a stony, judgmental stare. His feud with Elias wasn't new. It started when, as a toddler, he'd latched onto a slightly older Elias at a party and refused to let go, screaming and crying. That was strike one. His deep, innocent affection for Alara made Elias jealous. That was strike two. But the real reason for Elias's years of animosity was something else entirely. When Caleb was 15, he'd playfully draped a red cloth over Elias's head, just like in an old movie, and called him his bride. Elias's eyes had been red, but he hadn't fought back. Through the crimson silk, Caleb had his first kiss. He'd been drunk that night and remembered nothing the next day. It was Alara who, through gestures, told him what had happened. He couldn't understand why his future brother-in-law was so furious with him. When he learned the truth, he was mortified. He faked an illness and stayed home for 2 weeks, unable to face either of them. After all, he was supposed to be with Alara. Kissing someone while drunk was bad enough, but kissing this particular intimidating figure was a disaster. Of course, it was also a convenient excuse to skip his tutoring. Elias, knowing his lazy nature, showed up at his house, dragged him out of bed by his ear, and informed his parents in the living room that Caleb hadn't been to his sessions in 2 weeks and Theodore was asking about him. Caleb protested that he'd taken a leave of absence. Elias smiled thinly, saying the tutor hadn't approved it. The tutor was his uncle. That bastard had ratted him out. Elias had scoffed, saying he knew the illness was just an excuse. At 19, Elias's sharp, intelligent eyes seemed to see right through him. Caleb had been relieved, thinking Elias was just mad about the missed lessons and not the kiss. They had never spoken of it again, an unspoken truce between them. When he came of age, he followed his family's instructions and went to the Vaughn estate with a formal proposal. He put on a respectful smile. "Elias," he'd said, "I was wondering if that childhood promise of a match still holds." Elias had raised an eyebrow and confirmed that it did. Caleb had taken a breath. "Then I'd like to marry Alara." Elias's expression had changed. "What? You want to marry my sister?" He'd reacted with fury, calling Caleb worse than an animal. Caleb explained that their families had an agreement. Elias had retorted that she was only 14. The look in his eyes was fiery as he demanded to know if Caleb had any shame. Caleb bit his lip, stung by the verbal assault, and mumbled that she would be of age next year. He wanted to marry her. Elias had sneered. "You think you're worthy?" He pointed out that Caleb had said it was a match with the Vaughn family, and he was the firstborn of the Vaughn family. Caleb was speechless. The truth was, the arrangement had always been about him and Elias. His mother, during her pregnancy, had made a pact with her best friend, Elias's mother. The 4-year-old Elias had even touched his mother's belly and solemnly declared he would marry the baby inside. The following spring, Caleb was born. A boy. The world rejoiced, but Elias's world was shattered. He felt his efforts, sneaking out to read to the unborn baby, getting punished for bringing his mother grapes, had been a betrayal. So he resented Caleb. But Caleb had always adored him. At 5, Caleb fell gravely ill. On what he thought was his deathbed, he held Elias's hand and whispered that he wanted to play with him in the next life. Elias, with a sniffle, had coldly pulled his hand away and left. When Caleb woke up, it was the next spring. They told him Elias had found a rare, experimental treatment that saved his life. He had promised to be Elias's loyal friend forever. He knew Elias must have saved him because he couldn't bear to lose him. He was indispensable to Elias. Once he recovered, he was sent to the Ashworth compound as a companion for Theodore, a way for the senator to secure the Prescott family's loyalty. He went because he never had much of an opinion of his own, and Theodore was a decent guy. His cousin, Leo, was also there, so he was familiar with the family. On his first day, Elias was there too, brought by his uncle. And that was when, at 8 years old, he saw the first girl he ever wanted to protect. The Vaughn's newborn daughter, Alara, nestled in Elias's arms. Caleb had been sick when she was born and had never seen her. The boy, with his high ponytail, turned in the wind, his pale blue jacket fluttering to reveal the white silk shirt underneath. He was impossibly handsome, but Caleb was looking at the baby girl. Alara had a face 80% similar to Elias's, a perfect miniature version of him as a child. But she was a girl, so adorable. He reached out to hold her, but Elias clutched her protectively, shielding her from his view. That day, Caleb went home and made the first independent decision of his life. He begged his grandfather to bring up the old marriage pact and had his mother draw up a formal agreement to send to the Vaughns. He wanted to be engaged. Back then, he didn't understand the implications. He just knew the thought of taking the baby Elias held so tightly and making her his own filled him with a wicked sense of triumph. The Vaughns never sent a reply, and the memory faded. Later, his mother mentioned they had agreed. By then, their families were no longer close, political disagreements having created a rift. The Vaughns were temporarily pushed out of the inner circle and moved away from the capital. Caleb had cried, clinging to Elias and promising he would marry his sister one day. Elias had looked at him with an expression of profound sadness, wiping away his tears and promising he would return. Later, Caleb wrote him letters in his newly learned script. The replies were always in a formal, academic prose he couldn't understand. He had to get them translated just to learn that Elias was reporting it was raining where he was and that Caleb should wear a jacket. 2 years later, Mr. Vaughn's work in his new post earned him a promotion, and the family returned to D.C. Caleb was older and understood that the old agreement was now a political gesture, a sign that the Vaughn's were seeking to reestablish ties with the Prescotts. Sure enough, they soon sent a formal invitation, and Elias came to visit. The adults exchanged pleasantries while Caleb and Elias looked at each other, the long passage of time creating an awkward silence. Caleb had tried to see him when he first returned, but Elias's schedule was packed with tutors and studies. After several rejections, Caleb had given up, assuming Elias didn't want to see him. It wasn't as if he didn't have other friends. His aunt was practically family to the senator. He had plenty of people to hang out with. Strangely, it was Elias who initiated a conversation after dinner. Caleb, feeling awkward, was less than gracious. Elias suggested they play marbles, but Caleb, still feeling slighted, handed him a slingshot instead. That day, the snow had just stopped, blanketing the yard in a world of white. They stood in the ankle-deep powder, searching the sky for the gray flutter of birds. Caleb aimed with intense concentration but hit nothing. Elias, with casual indifference, brought down bird after bird. Caleb got angry. It was one thing to be outmatched in academics, but to be shown up in something as simple as shooting birds was humiliating. Elias laughed softly, telling him he was being as pouty as his sister. The comment broke the tension, and for a moment, it felt like old times. Caleb eagerly asked about Elara. Elias answered selectively, painting a picture of a sweet, round-faced little girl that only made Caleb miss her more, even though he'd only met her once. Elias asked why he cared so much about his sister. Caleb whispered in his ear that he couldn't tell anyone, but he thought he kind of liked her. Elias froze for a second, then smiled, asking if someone so young even knew what like meant. Of course, Caleb insisted. Liking someone meant wanting to give them all your favorite things. Elias leaned in close, his warm breath and unique scent tickling Caleb's ear, and whispered that Elara's favorite thing was using a heavy jade seal to crack walnuts because it was fast. Caleb remembered a seal in his father's study that was rarely used and asked Elias if he wanted it. Elias shook his head, saying he couldn't just take it. Caleb pointed at the birds he'd shot. Then trade me for those. Some time passed peacefully. Elias returned the seal before Caleb's father noticed it was gone. Caleb asked if he had used it for anything other than cracking walnuts. Elias frowned, asking what he was implying. He said Caleb had trusted him with it, so why would he misuse that trust? Caleb said nothing more, only that as long as his conscience was clear, it was fine. The Vaughn patriarch was a former Secretary of State, a man still widely respected even in retirement. The Prescotts, on the other hand, had no deep political roots. Their influence came from a tangential connection to the Ashworths. Caleb's father, having never known wealth, was greedy, a trait Caleb feared would be exploited. He hoped Elias's actions might mitigate some of his father's sins, or perhaps even help him. Elias was well-read and understood the struggles of ordinary people. If Caleb weren't so afraid of his father, he would have given Elias the jade seal his cousin Leo had secretly given his father. Elias, he said, using the name he hadn't used in a long time. He knew his family was old-fashioned, resistant to change, a pawn in someone else's game. But he asked Elias if, when the time came, he could ensure his family's safety. Elias watched him without blinking, and Caleb felt a wave of unease under his steady gaze. As Theodore's protege, Elias had influence. Caleb hadn't been to the Ashworth compound since the rift between their families, growing closer to Leo instead. Leo was impulsive and arrogant, treating Caleb, who was a year younger, like a child. The stress of it all made Caleb's chronic illness flare up. He lay in bed, coughing up blood, weakly declaring he would never go back to that place. The Ashworths sent an emissary with medicine, a gift from his aunt. Watching his beaming, clueless father, Caleb knew the chest contained more than just medicine. Sure enough, buried under a layer of gold bars were a few small vials of pills. A darkness clouded his vision. He could see no future for the Prescott family. His aunt was tying his father to Leo's sinking ship with sentiment and money. If he could see it, so could everyone else. Senator Ashworth was in his prime. He would surely crush any perceived threat. He wouldn't tolerate it. So, on a carefully chosen day, citing a minor breach of protocol, the senator banished his aunt to political obscurity with a single, quiet order. Leo, in a fit of pique, argued with his father and was confined to his rooms. Caleb was filled with anxiety, counting the days until his family's downfall. With their patron gone and a fortune in illicit cash hidden away, they were an easy target. But weeks passed, and nothing happened. No whispers from the senator's office, no one accusing his father of corruption. Besides his father's sullen mood over his sister's disgrace, everything was strangely normal. He wondered if it was Elias's doing. But Elias was only 16 with no official position. Could his connection to Theodore really be enough to save them? On Caleb's 14th birthday, his father, who rarely drank, downed 2 bottles of scotch and then howled at the sky. He lamented his love of money, crying that having it taken away was worse than never having it at all. The house staff dragged him away, leaving the party in chaos. Caleb sat at his table, lost, listening to the scattered whispers. He finally understood that his father had donated 80% of their family's wealth to a military fund for border security. The senator, seeing their cooperation, had let the matter drop. After the guests left, Caleb saw Elias standing by the door, dressed in a striking red shirt that contrasted with his placid expression. Caleb asked why he was still there. Elias replied that he had repaid his debt. Caleb nodded, thanking him. Alara, standing beside him, held out her hand. In it was a small, woven grass grasshopper. "Happy birthday," Elias coughed, adding that Alara had just made it for him. Alara was 6 years younger than Caleb, 10 years younger than her brother. A lump formed in Caleb's throat. He took the grasshopper, thanking her. Alara had been born mute, a quiet, beautiful child who resembled her brother. Elias, so often dismissive of Caleb, was endlessly gentle and patient with his sister. Caleb had always been drawn to Elias, but he knew Elias didn't see him as a friend. He was usually ignored unless Elias needed something. Caleb knew this, but he remembered the life-saving medicine and held onto the good. His family's survival was likely due to Elias's maneuvering behind the scenes. He should be grateful, so he continued to shamelessly pursue his friendship. The following year, thanks to his father's generosity, the Prescott family was on the verge of bankruptcy. Their prestige was tied to the political climate, so when their patrons fell, so did their fortunes. On a cold day in late winter, Caleb went to the Vaughn estate for Elias's birthday. His father, assuming their families were close, saw no need for a gift and promptly drank himself into a stupor. His grandfather sighed, gave him a small jade sculpture, and sent him on his way. Caleb donned his finest coat. They might be poor, but they still had their pride. The sedan chair they sent for him was painfully bumpy. They really needed to downsize their staff. Elias's birthday party was far grander than his own. It was filled with people seeking favors from the Vaughns, a symphony of mutual flattery. Caleb watched coldly as Elias moved through the crowd, wearing a fake smile, seemingly enjoying the attention. Alara handed him a slice of a winter orange, cold and sour. He sniffled, a pang of bitterness in his heart. Seeing his watery eyes, Alara looked helpless, finally offering him a handkerchief. Embroidered on it was a spider lily, its leaves rendered with a wild, vigorous energy. In the corner was a single word, Zephyr. It was the name Elias had chosen for himself long ago. Elias Zephyr Vaughn. He was arrogant, but the name suited him. Suddenly, Caleb remembered his own birthday, when Elias had asked him, "Aren't you going to ask what I did with the seal?" He had looked up at him, not daring to ask, just shaking his head. The Prescotts publicly opposed the new legislation. Elias's voice was a low murmur in the memory. "Years ago, your family's actions got mine exiled. Did you think I would just forget that?" He explained that if it weren't for Theodore, his family would never have returned to the capital. The Prescott cargo ships were carrying contraband, some of it illegal. Elias had stopped there, but Caleb had his own people investigate. It was Leo's doing. He thought of his foolish cousin and hesitated, suggesting it couldn't have been him. Elias confirmed it wasn't him directly, but his mother, Caleb's aunt, who had used his father, who was just playing dumb. Elias had stepped closer, his voice dripping with mockery. "Caleb, why is everyone in your family so stupid? If this smuggling operation were exposed, how many heads would you have to offer?" Caleb had trembled, his voice shaking as he asked what they should do. Elias's fox-like eyes narrowed. The solution, he'd explained, was to divert the goods into Theodore's hands. He'd paused, telling Caleb he should be grateful for his decision. He had expected to have trouble getting the seal from Caleb's father, but Caleb had made it so easy. Elias had used Leo's private seal to orchestrate the whole thing. His father, having lost the shipment, was too scared to report it and had quietly retired from the business. So, Caleb asked, was saving his family their way of returning the favor? Elias said it was a simple matter, not a trade. He added, how could Caleb think a single shipment could offset the Prescott's crimes? The amount of dirty money his family had was staggering. With his aunt out of favor, if Theodore had really wanted to investigate, all he needed was a nod from the senator. Caleb understood. Elias had forced his father to give up their fortune to secure their safety. Elias confirmed it was the best solution. His father wasn't a complete fool. Looking at Elias's triumphant face, Caleb had asked what he meant by repaying his debt. Elias had paused, then said it was the debt he owed Alara. From now on, Caleb was forbidden from liking her. He was to see her only as a sister. Caleb had thought for a moment, then bowed deeply, his voice muffled. Thank you. He could no longer like her. He mumbled the words to himself. He sat on the veranda with Alara, who handed him another woven grasshopper. There was something invincible about children. Being with her reminded him of the happy days before he was sent to the Ashworth compound. He couldn't weave, so he told her that since she was physically frail, he would teach her how to play. He'd been sick as a child too, so he knew it was possible. Alara blinked and nodded. He gave her a piece of his jade pendant. I'll be the dad, you be the mom. He handed her a blade of grass. Wife, time for dinner. He showed her how to pretend to chew and say it was delicious. Since she couldn't speak, he told her to just move her mouth. Suddenly, Elias lifted him up and set him on a stone bench. He said he brought Alara here for company, not for Caleb to teach her such mindless games. Caleb glared at him. What do you know? This is how I played as a kid. Idiot, Elias commented flatly. Infuriated, Caleb coughed twice, claimed his old illness was acting up, and made to leave. But Elias grabbed him again, looking uncomfortable. I'm not mad at you anymore. Just stay with Alara. Caleb asked if he wasn't afraid he'd run off with her. Elias suddenly grabbed his chin, his voice sharp. You dare. He heard that Elias was to be appointed to a position after the new year. He'd done well on his exams, and the senator had given him a job in the Justice Department. More importantly, the senator's favorite niece, Annalise, was smitten with him. An unpleasant feeling stirred in Caleb's chest. It was probably just because he and Annalise had never gotten along. He stayed with Alara until the afternoon, when the staff began lighting the evening lanterns. That was when the birthday party officially began. He had chattered endlessly with Alara, spilling all the gossip about the D.C. elite. When it was time, a servant came to fetch him. He led Alara inside but couldn't find a place for himself at the main tables. He let go of her hand and found a seat in the most obscure corner. Elias sat at the head table with his guests, especially the adoring Annalise, who had been given the seat closest to him and was peppering him with questions. Caleb felt a surge of contempt and drank one glass of wine after another. Annalise saw him and gave him a pitying look. Well, if it isn't Caleb. You look a little worse for wear these days. He nodded. Unlike you, princess. All those beauty treatments, and yet, he took a sip of wine, set the glass down gently, and finished his sentence. "You still look the same." Before Annalise could retort, Elias spoke, his tone even. "Annalise, don't lower yourself to his level." His voice was flat, but Caleb detected an underlying meaning. Was Elias already taking her side before they were even engaged? And here he thought they were having a moment. Annalise, whose full name was Annalise Thorne, preened at Elias's words, shooting Caleb a triumphant look. He pursed his lips. She was just the senator's illegitimate niece. What was the big deal? Frankly, Elias's party was dull. There were musicians and dancers, but it all felt forced. The food was mediocre. Still, the pile of gifts was enormous. Some people were just desperate to curry favor. With no one to talk to, Caleb drank glass after glass. On his way back from the restroom, he overheard two people gossiping about him. The usual stuff. The Prescott family was finished. They were clinging to their past glory. He let out a drunken hiccup. He was a magnet for gossip. Hiding in a corner, he listened intently. Theodore and his 6'2" security agent had a drunken escapade. He knew that. Marcus, on his 17th birthday, had tried to offer himself to a powerful lobbyist. He knew that too. Elias was seen frequenting a high-end escort service with male companions. Wait, who? Elias? A jolt went through him, and he could feel his heart pounding. The alcohol in his system suddenly felt like fire. He sobered up instantly. In his haste, he knocked over a glass, its clatter on the floor making the two gossipers turn around. After they left, he breathed a sigh of relief. His dark clothing had blended into the shadows. He composed himself and returned to his seat, but his hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold his glass. Elias was still laughing and talking with his guests. Caleb drank more. He looked at Elias's cool, detached features and suddenly understood why a man with his looks and status had no romantic rumors about him. Even Caleb, a man himself, had to admit Elias was stunning. Broad shoulders, narrow waist, women who were expected to marry young would be too fragile to handle him. But if it were him, no, wrong thought. He wasn't gay. He must have had too much to drink. Despite his inner turmoil, he kept his face impassive. But he couldn't stop looking at Elias. Elias must have felt his stare because he raised an eyebrow, a silent question in his eyes. Caleb mimicked the gesture, tilted his empty glass, and mouthed, "No more wine." It was incredibly awkward. Elias summoned a servant to bring more wine to his corner. As a guest, he couldn't refuse his host's generosity. And with his mind troubled, he drank until he couldn't stand. The party ended at some point. He stumbled out with the crowd. A cool hand grasped his wrist. It must be the family driver waiting for him. Unsteady on his feet, he leaned heavily on the arm and was then lifted into a side carry. Felt strange. He mumbled his displeasure. Elias's voice, laced with impatience, asked what he was saying. Elias. He struggled to focus on the face before him. "So beautiful. My dear," he slurred. Elias's hand on his waist tightened. "What did you say?" Caleb asked if he could stay at his house. Elias raised an eyebrow. Why? Elias must not have eaten much, because his body was cool. Caleb wrapped his arms around his neck. The cool, solid feel was comforting. His head cleared a little. The rumor about Elias liking men popped into his head. "Because I want to marry you," he blurted out. Elias frowned. "Marry me?" He laughed. "Caleb, are you insane?" The thought of their family's agreement surfaced. "Elias, marry me." "Marry you?" Elias sneered. Caleb, you're a child who hasn't even grown up yet. You like men, don't you? Caleb shot back in a low voice. What's wrong with marrying me? No one else would dare. He then used Alara as leverage. If you don't marry me, I'll marry your sister. Before he could say more, Elias adjusted his grip and smiled. Fine. In his bedroom, Caleb surveyed the surroundings, offered a drunken critique, and then collapsed onto a chaise lounge. Elias approached. From Caleb's angle, his profile was breathtaking. On a drunken whim, he draped a decorative cloth over Elias's head like a wedding veil and, through the fabric, kissed him. He could feel Elias freeze for a moment. Then, his hands went to Caleb's waist, trying to push him away. Caleb smiled smugly. In this state, he was unstoppable. He kissed him until Elias's eyes were red-rimmed, and the hands on his waist were no longer pushing him away. He didn't dare do more, keeping the cloth between them. It was Elias who finally tossed the cloth aside, cupped the back of his neck, and deepened the kiss. Caleb couldn't breathe, his mind growing even fuzzier. His only thought was to dominate the situation. Insolence, he mumbled nonsensically. Only I get to kiss you. Elias, breathing heavily but composed, replied, Caleb, you're the one who said I like men. You brought this on yourself. He added, with a hint of amusement, you seem quite skilled. Been watching things you shouldn't? Things I shouldn't? Caleb asked. Porn? He denied it. Really? Elias's fingers dug into his waist. Then how did you know I like men? You were with an escort, Caleb mumbled, looking down, but Elias gripped his wrist. Who told you that, Caleb? Elias's eyes, still soft with the remnants of their kiss, turned cold. Were you spying on me? Caleb stared back, wide-eyed, and let out a drunken hiccup. He abruptly changed the subject. You don't have a thing for Annalise? Before Elias could answer, a wave of nausea hit him, and he threw up all over Elias's sleeve. Elias's face went rigid, not because Caleb had ruined his expensive, custom-made designer jacket, but because he saw Alara standing in the open doorway watching them. Elias was silent for a long moment, then ordered a servant to take him home. The next day, Caleb slept until noon, feeling drained. He ate a little and went back to bed. He remembered nothing of the previous night, only that he'd gotten drunk at the Vaughn's. He had a big mouth. Sober, he could keep a secret, but drunk, anything could come out. He slapped his head. Why did he drink so much? Then he remembered Annalise and her smug attitude. That was why. He decided to go confront her. Better to blame someone else than himself. But then he remembered her connections and decided against it. The next best thing was to confront Elias. But when he got to the Vaughn estate, Elias refused to see him. Why? After all the time he'd spent with Alara, he deserved at least an explanation. He grumbled to himself in the foyer, not daring to say anything out loud. Finally, Alara came out and led him to her room. He stopped at the doorway, hesitant to go in. Even though she was young, he knew it was improper for them to be alone in her bedroom. And with her difficult brother, it was better to be cautious. He told her they could talk right there. She made a gesture, asking if he was angry with her brother. He shrugged, saying he didn't understand what was wrong with him. Then he remembered the gossip and asked in a low voice if he had said anything outrageous last night. Alara thought for a moment and shook her head. He was about to breathe a sigh of relief when she made a kissing gesture. His brow furrowed. She then pointed at him, then made a gesture for her brother, and then the kissing gesture again. Kissed. Thank you, Alara. He never knew those gestures could be combined in that way. Once he understood the full picture, he practically tumbled out of the Vaughn estate. "Caleb, you are a brave man. Don't ever be that brave again." Still, walking home, he couldn't help but feel a little disappointed. What did Elias taste like? He couldn't remember. "Enough, Caleb. This isn't the time for reminiscing. Do you have a death wish?" After that, he avoided the Ashworth compound entirely, terrified of running into Elias, who sometimes brought his sister to his tutoring sessions. But strangely, the less he pursued Elias, the more Elias seemed to show up at his house, claiming he was there to see his father. But Caleb knew his father and Elias had nothing in common. Connecting this to the recent events, he began to wonder if Elias really was gay. So this was bad. He was coming for him. "Caleb, are you crazy?" Annalise's voice was a sharp whisper. "What if they find out? Could cause an international incident. If the goal is peace and cooperation, does it matter if the envoy is a man or a woman?" Caleb countered. Unless the whole point was to start a war in the first place. He wiped away her tears. "Don't cry. I can't stand to see women cry." As they neared their destination in Europe, his chronic illness flared up again. His face took on a grayish pallor, and his nighttime coughing fits were so violent he felt he might cough up a lung. He had the doctor add something stronger to his medicine to suppress the symptoms. One day, Annalise came to his car, looking uncharacteristically cheerful. She announced it was her birthday. He smiled, saying he hadn't forgotten. She said she wanted fish for dinner. "All right," he agreed. While stirring her soup, she mentioned offhandedly that she had decided to go through with the deal herself. He was stunned. "What are you talking about?" "The merger," she said with a smile. She explained that she had done a lot of thinking. It was her responsibility to bear, and she shouldn't drag others into it. "Annalise, are you willing? Are you happy about this?" "Caleb," she said, as if seeing right through him, "I'm a political figure. Did you know that the senator had already arranged a marriage for me with Elias?" She looked down, a sad smile on her face. "But no one knew except me." "Do you want to marry him?" he asked. "He doesn't like me," she said breezily. "He's just one man. You can have him. I have more important things to do." She met his eyes. "Annalise, you don't have to think about any of that. Just tell me, do you want to do this? If you don't, I have other ways." After a long pause, she asked if he knew what he looked like right now. Her lips trembled, and tears fell. "You look like you're dying, Caleb." He flinched. "Don't be ridiculous. I, Caleb Prescott, will live a long life. I'm counting on it," she said. "Caleb, if you take my place, what about the next woman who is forced into a political marriage? Who will take her place? When will our country be strong enough that it doesn't need to sacrifice its daughters?" She paused. "When that day comes, I'll come home." He promised that when that day came, he would be the one to bring her home. They arrived at the corporate headquarters in the heart of the European city. At the celebratory dinner, the CEO, a young and charismatic man, insisted Caleb stay for the formal signing. He was a tall, handsome man, and Caleb could see Annalise didn't seem displeased. Slightly drunk, Caleb agreed. The CEO showed him to a guest suite not far from Annalise's. The night air was cold, and a headache started to throb behind his eyes. He fumbled for his pills and swallowed them dry, the chalky texture making him cough. He couldn't stop. He tried to call for help, but his voice was a mere whisper. He slumped against the bed, gasping for air. Remembering the water carafe on the table, he reached for it, knocking the entire tray onto the plush carpet. The sound was completely muffled. A dark figure entered the room, silhouetted against the cool blue light from the window. A blast of cold air made him shiver. Medicine, he rasped as the figure approached. A spray of blood erupted from his throat as he coughed, and his eyelids grew heavy. He woke to find the CEO holding his hand, his eyes full of concern. Caleb managed to sit up and pull his hand away, thanking him and saying he was fine. The CEO sighed, telling him his pale face said otherwise. His thumb brushed against Caleb's lips. "You seem to be hurt here." "A mosquito bite, probably," Caleb said, trying to dismiss him. "It's late. You should go." The lingering touch was unnerving. The CEO reluctantly withdrew his hand. "I'm just across the hall. Call me if you need anything." After he left, Caleb called over a young, handsome attendant from the hotel staff. "You, help me with my bath." The attendant glanced at him and approached with his head down. Caleb leaned against him as he was helped from the bed to the bathroom. The medicine had given him some strength back, enough to stand with support. "Undress me," he ordered. The attendant seemed inexperienced, fumbling with the clothes. A mischievous impulse took hold of Caleb. He placed the attendant's hand over his heart. First time, the attendant didn't speak, but his other hand went to Caleb's waist and untied his belt. Caleb continued, "Your eyes, they remind me of someone I used to know." The attendant kept his head down. "Who?" Caleb said lightly, "It doesn't matter. He's dead." He felt the attendant tense up. He changed the subject. "What's your name?" "Rory," the attendant replied curtly. Caleb repeated the name, then asked if he knew why he had been summoned. The attendant's hands stilled. "To help you bathe." "Wrong," Caleb said with a smile, leaning his head towards the attendant's neck. "To help me to bed." The attendant stiffened and finally looked at him. His pale skin was flushed, his brow furrowed in anger. He pushed Caleb 2 steps back. "Is this how you treat everyone?" The sudden push made Caleb lose his composure. His body trembled as he was seized by another coughing fit. Realizing he'd gone too far, the attendant rushed to support him. Caleb leaned against him, his voice a weak joke. "To think a mere hotel attendant would dare treat me this way. I'm a terrible excuse for a dignitary." He snatched the watch from the attendant's wrist. It was his watch. "Who gave you permission to wear my watch? And you pretended to be so shy. Clearly, you planned to seduce me all along." Elias could no longer maintain the charade. He dumped Caleb into the medicated bath, looking down at him. "You're this weak, and you still have the energy to flirt?" Caleb clung to the edge of the tub. "What's it to you? Why are you here?" "Business," Elias said, his disguise gone, revealing his own face. His sharp eyes seemed to hold a hint of emotion. "And to see if you were dead yet." Caleb gave a weak laugh. The atmosphere turned cold. He turned his back. "Get out, Elias. I need to bathe. We're both men. What's there to see?" Elias said with a dismissive laugh. "It's not you I'm worried about," Caleb retorted. "I'm afraid I might not be able to control myself around you." Elias leaned down, gripping his chin. "Oh?" A scent of sandalwood mixed with the medicinal aroma of the bath surrounded him. It was the same as the prescription he was taking. "I'm a man who appreciates wealth and beauty," Caleb said casually. "And you, my dear Elias, happen to be both." Elias's eyes half closed. He leaned closer, his voice husky. "Caleb, you really do have a beautiful face. You have no idea how much I want to shut that mouth of yours right now." Caleb closed his eyes, but the expected kiss never came. Elias said, his voice cool and arrogant again, "You didn't actually think I was going to kiss you, did you?" Caleb rolled his eyes, grabbed Elias's arm, pulled himself up, and bit him hard on the shoulder. "Caleb, are you a dog?" Elias winced, but the word was more of a fond complaint than an insult. Caleb grinned like a delinquent. "Why did you kiss me?" he asked. "You didn't say I couldn't." Elias, feeling he'd lost face, seemed determined to get the upper hand. He cupped Caleb's neck and kissed him, roughly, his lips pressing against the cut on Caleb's mouth. In a daze, Caleb heard Elias whisper, "Mine," so softly it seemed he was talking to himself. When the kiss ended, Elias's eyes were hazy. "Caleb, what are we?" "Yes, what are we?" Caleb was still clinging to his neck, demanding another kiss. "You kissed me. I'm just getting even." He paused. "Though you did seem to take advantage of me when I was sick." "I was giving you medicine," Elias said, his gaze lowered. "You should thank me." Caleb closed his eyes. Thank you." Annalise was the same age as him. At 19, she was considered late to marry, but to him, she was in her prime.
Annelise Oratorn.
She was the most vibrant and free-spirited woman in Washington, as wild and untamed as the wind. Tonight was the New Year's Eve celebration in this foreign city. They adopted the local customs, wearing heavy woolen robes. Annalise, always radiant, looked stunning in the brightly colored local silks and layers of beaded necklaces. He presented her with a willow branch he'd cut for her on their way north, when they'd passed a river lined with weeping willows. The branch was now dry and dark. "A willow branch for parting," he said, quoting a line of poetry, "and the bright moon for the one left behind." She remarked that it was more profound than his usual attempts. She took off the small jade Buddha she always wore around her neck. "This is for your birthday. Why are you giving me this?" "To keep you safe," she said. "I don't believe in that." "I do," she replied, her gaze steady. "I want you to live a long, long life." A staff member came and whispered something to her. It was time for her to go into seclusion, as was the local custom for a bride the day before her wedding. He watched her walk away, the jade in his hand already warm. He looked at the serene smile of the Buddha and felt an unexpected sense of reverence. If you protect all of humanity, he thought, could you also protect me? I'm not asking for much. On the day of Annalise's wedding, it snowed. A good omen, the locals said, calling Annalise a goddess sent from his country. The snow fell in heavy flakes, covering the barren ground. It didn't feel as cold as usual. His hands were warm. Whatever formula Elias had found for him was working. He should have given it to him sooner. Thinking of Elias, he realized he hadn't seen him in days. Tonight was Annalise's wedding night, and his last day here. A fire burned in the tent, and the air was thick with the smell of roasted meat. The CEO, already drunk, stumbled over to his table. They toasted, and after Caleb drank, the man didn't leave. The noise around him suddenly became deafening. The sounds amplified and distorted. His vision blurred, and then everything went black. He woke up to a sea of red silk. He was tied up in the bridal chamber. The CEO strode towards him, his boots sinking into the carpet. "Caleb, Your Excellency, what is the meaning of this?" He struggled, but his body was limp. He'd been drugged. The CEO took his hand, his exotic eyes filled with a disturbing tenderness. "I like you very much. Be my bride." He pressed Caleb's hand to his face. The scene was grotesquely chilling. "Where is Annalise?" "She's fine," the CEO said, a hint of sadness in his eyes at Caleb's disgusted expression. "As long as you're willing to spend the night with me. I am a representative of my country, here on official business. Your actions are a grave insult." "Your country?" He laughed. "Your new leader won't risk a diplomatic incident for a minor envoy like you. I fought against your military when I was a prince. You're weak. He paused, his tone softening. I truly like you. If you agree, you can stay here as my consort. You can be with the princess. You're friends, aren't you? And if I refuse? Caleb asked through gritted teeth. The CEO's smile was chilling. I'm afraid that's not up to you. He produced a small vial and forced the contents down Caleb's throat. You should try this. It's one of your own country's medicines. He said it would make him feel good. Was it Radley? Caleb choked out, a cold dread washing over him. Was it General Radley? Radley had been his father's subordinate. After his father's death, he'd received a significant promotion from the senator. They must have been in on it together. You'll find out later, the CEO said, his eyes filled with lust. Right now, it's time for business. If this is your first time, I'll be gentle. Get away from me, Caleb yelled, but the drug had taken hold. Someone, help! Look what your leader is doing. The CEO tied a gag around his mouth. Caleb, you'll like this. The cold air on his exposed skin made him shiver. He couldn't scream, only make muffled sounds. His body was boneless. The CEO opened a jar of scented oil. The scent of osmanthus. It suits you. The cold oil on his skin felt like fire. He squeezed his eyes shut, tears streaming down his face, and braced himself. He heard the sound of a blade piercing flesh, followed by a blast of cold wind. Warm liquid splattered across his face. The CEO coughed up a mouthful of blood. Who? Elias stood over them, his sword drawn. Special Investigator Elias Vaughn, Military Contracts Division. He glanced around and saw Caleb's disheveled state. He paused, then took off his cloak and wrapped it around him. The fabric was cold and smelled of the night air and of Elias. He looked at the dying CEO. Tell me, was Radley your informant? Was he involved in the general's death? Radley and his associates were already in custody. Now, Elias said, it's just him left. Caleb grabbed at his tangled hair, the long-suppressed hatred boiling over. He looked up, his voice shaking. Give me the sword. What? Give me the sword. With trembling hands, he took the weapon and slit the CEO's throat. The man let out a gurgle of pain, more blood showering Caleb's face. Caleb started to laugh, a wild, unhinged sound. The drug's paralytic effect wore off, replaced by a burning heat. He shoved the man to the floor and stabbed him again and again, until the body was still. He dropped the sword and crawled to the side of the bed, shaking. Elias knelt in front of him, wiping his face with a handkerchief. Caleb flinched back to reality and grabbed Elias's hand. Elias, I was so scared. Elias said nothing, just continued to gently clean the blood from his face. Caleb felt a warm wetness on his cheeks and realized he was crying. Elias stroked his brow. It's all right. It's over. He pulled Caleb into his arms. It's over, Caleb. The cool scent of Elias was a grounding presence. Caleb collapsed against him, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Elias touched his forehead. Your medicine is taking effect, he said, his voice husky. I'll get a doctor. Caleb sniffled and wrapped his arms around Elias's waist. Elias, help me. General Radley, his father's trusted aide, had been secretly communicating with the rival conglomerate for 5 years. 4 years ago, he had accompanied Caleb's father to the border. After the military contract scandal, the previous administration cleaned house, and in the ensuing chaos, Radley had managed to secure a promotion. Someone in federal prison talked before he died the next day, Elias explained, his voice clipped. Theodore and I knew something was wrong, so I came to investigate myself. He added with a sneer, turns out I found a few things. Besides the faulty equipment, Radley also leaked a map of our border defenses to them. Caleb took a deep breath, his voice filled with rage. That son of a bitch. I'm going to kill him. You'll do no such thing, Elias said dismissively. He's already been through interrogation. There's not much left of him. My people are transporting him back to the capital. Whether he survives the trip is up to fate. Caleb mumbled, "You're the lead investigator on this case. When the time comes, can I be the one?" Elias glanced at him. "Can you take a man's head off with one swing?" "I think so," Caleb nodded. "We'll see," Elias said. "It might not come to that." He pulled Caleb closer. "Are you listening?" Radley then helped the new CEO take power. The border skirmishes were manufactured crises to get more funding from our government. He paused, a ghost of a smile on his face. Guess what he wanted the money for? What? Elias raised an eyebrow. With that kind of distance, he was his own king. He was building a private army. Maybe one day he'd march on the Capitol and make himself senator. He added coldly, a pity his ambition outstripped his competence. All his talent went into covering his tracks. He sighed. The fact that I had to travel halfway across the world for this mess is infuriating. Caleb looked at Elias's stoic expression and found it almost funny. He had always been like this, cold on the outside, but deeply passionate beneath the surface. Everyone, including Caleb, had thought the case was closed, but Elias had never forgotten. The newly appointed head of the conglomerate was the former CEO's eldest daughter. She thanked them and honored the agreement with Annalise, with the official ceremony to take place in March. On the journey home, Caleb and Elias shared a car. Elias took Caleb's cold hands in his, warming them. The memory of their last night together made Caleb turn away, embarrassed. "You don't have to." "Oh," Elias said, obediently letting go. Caleb, spurred by a sudden boldness, asked Elias, "Do you stand by what you said before?" "What did I say?" "That you wanted me to move into the Vaughn estate. As your husband." He looked at him. "You haven't forgotten, have you?" "I do recall something of the sort," Elias said, feigning deep thought. "But I also recall someone refusing." Caleb's fingertips were turning blue from the cold. He swallowed his pride and grabbed Elias's hand again. "Well, I'm agreeing now. You can't take it back." Elias raised an eyebrow. What's gotten into you?" Caleb shrank back a little. "It's cold." Elias squeezed his hand. "What are you afraid of?" "I never said I wouldn't agree." Caleb looked down at their intertwined hands. Elias's fingers were long and elegant. A true fox. Since Elias was traveling incognito, he had to ride with Caleb. The journey was uneventful, much like the trip there. The only difference was that every night, Elias would come to his room to warm his bed. In the dim light, Caleb could always see the scar on his right arm, a series of faint, overlapping lines, as if it had been deliberately reopened several times. When he asked about it, Elias would just kiss him fiercely and say it was all his fault, not stopping until Caleb was crying. It took them half a year to get back to the capital. By then, Theodore had been in power for months. Caleb went to the Vaughn estate 3 times a week. His mother and grandfather assumed he was courting Alara. He proudly told them he was in love with Elias. His grandfather exploded with rage, calling him a disgrace. His mother took to her bed for 3 months, telling him he was her only son and he couldn't do this to her. He was the last of the Prescott line. He learned then that a union between 2 men was considered an unforgivable sin. He could have as many male lovers as he wanted, but for marriage it had to be a woman. Even the new leader, Theodore, had quietly dismissed the security agent who was once always by his side. Elias, meanwhile, was being disciplined by his own family. As the head of the Vaughn family, he had an even greater duty to marry and produce an heir. It took Caleb a long time to accept it. Finally, he smiled and told his family he was fine, he wouldn't do it again. Elias's role in the new administration made him a powerful figure. Caleb used their childhood friendship to his advantage, making connections. One day, his mother told him to take the old marriage contract and some gifts and go see Alara. Marrying Alara was, after all, extremely beneficial to them. He dressed in his finest clothes. Looking so handsome, he almost fell in love with himself. He went to the Vaughn estate and saw Elias. Remembering he was his future brother-in-law, he put on a respectful smile. "Elias, I was wondering if that childhood promise of a match still holds." Elias raised an eyebrow and confirmed that it did. A sour feeling rose in Caleb's throat. "Then I'd like to marry Alara." "What? You want to marry my sister?" Elias reacted with fury. "Caleb, what are you trying to pull?" Caleb explained that their families had an agreement and Alara was of marrying age. Elias's eyes blazed. "She shouldn't be marrying you." He grabbed Caleb's hand. "Caleb, what's wrong with you?" Caleb bit his lip, on the verge of tears. "Let go of me, Elias. Did someone force you to do this?" "No," Caleb said. "I was lying to you. I don't like men. I would never marry a man. I'm here to ask for Alara's hand in marriage." "Marry her?" Elias sneered. "You think you're worthy?" He reminded Caleb that the agreement was with the Vaughn family, and he was the firstborn. Caleb was speechless. He took a step back. "Elias, I have to go." They all said he'd lost his mind. He didn't feel any different. He could still dress and feed himself, still play music. What was so different? He traveled overseas and brought his father's ashes home. His mother cried and laughed at the same time, clinging to him. How could he defy her? Theodore, in recognition of his service escorting the princess, asked what reward he wanted. Caleb bowed and said that his family had a marriage contract with the Vaughns, and he humbly requested the leader's blessing for a union with the Vaughn daughter. Theodore paused, then smiled. "Excellent. I've been meaning to arrange a match between you and the Vaughns for some time." Caleb glanced at Elias, who stood impassively. If he wouldn't agree, Caleb would find someone who could force him to. As he was leaving, Elias approached him, his voice cold. "Caleb, you just wait." The Vaughn family ran into trouble. Elias was accused of corruption. The accusation came from a cousin, a minor official in the same department. The scandal was huge. Elias was dismissed from his post and thrown in jail. The madman. This is what he meant by "you just wait." Caleb went to his aunt, now a respected elder in the political circle, and begged her to intervene. She sighed and produced a pardon from the previous administration, a relic of a bygone era. Overjoyed, Caleb bought a bottle of cheap wine and drank it as he walked through the brightly lit streets. A car, driven recklessly, sped onto a bridge. Caleb was jostled by the crowd and fell into the icy river below. The thin ice broke. Took them a long time to find him. They said the prolonged exposure to the cold water had damaged his brain. He had a fever for days. On the brink of death, Elias came to see him with his sister and a new prescription. The next day, the fever broke. His mother said Alara was his guardian angel. He had always loved Alara. They were childhood sweethearts. He looked at a small photo of her. She was definitely his type. He even had the grasshopper she had given him. It seemed they were truly in love. The Vaughn family was now tainted by scandal, and everyone kept their distance. The administration sent an inquiry. Was the marriage still on? His mother said yes. It was a miracle he had recovered. The wedding was prepared, but his future brother-in-law was nowhere to be seen. It was strange, but he didn't dwell on it. Theodore seemed to hold no grudge against the Vaughns. He even promoted Elias's cousin. As the wedding day approached, Caleb felt a growing unease. One night, he saw a dark figure outside his window. Before he could cry out, a hand covered his mouth. The man leaned over him, his body heavy, the scent of the cold night air clinging to him. He recognized the scent. Found a weak spot, the man whispered, his lips brushing against Caleb's. He bit down on Caleb's collarbone. "Ungrateful brat. After all the times I've saved you," he said, "you listen to me. I don't care if you've lost your memory or not. You are not marrying my sister." Caleb knew that Alara was the apple of her family's eye. "You're Elias," he said. A sharp pain in the back of his neck, and then nothing. The Prescott estate hadn't been this lively in years. Because it was a wedding blessed by Theodore, almost all of D.C.'s elite were there. His mother, because of his recent illness, had handled everything. The Vaughn family was wealthy. The bride's dowry was substantial. Before the ceremony, he had always imagined Alara to be small and delicate. He didn't expect her to be so tall. His mother's expression was strained, but a commotion at the entrance cut her off. A sharp voice announced the arrival of the leader. Everyone knelt, but the young leader helped him up. Caleb, no need for formalities. He seated Theodore at the head table. He only had one security agent with him. Strange. Elias was supposedly devoted to his sister. Why wasn't he at her wedding? And why did that bother him? He sat quietly at his table, lost in thought. He'd never been married before, but he had a vague memory of attending weddings. Something was missing. No one was asking him to drink. He picked up his glass. "Aren't you guys going to toast me?" An awkward silence fell over the room. He looked down and drained the glass of water. A maid led him to the bridal chamber. He looked at the ceremonial wine on the table. It was also water. How boring. Did he really love Alara? He looked at the figure sitting on the bed, so patient and still. Tall, beautiful, elegant. A lovely jade pendant hung from her waist, just as his mother had said, his type. He shook his head, clearing it of other thoughts, and lifted her veil with a jade wand. A face so much like Elias's it took his breath away. "Alara?" The figure tilted her chin up, a smile that was more of a grimace on her lips. "Husband." It was a man's voice. He froze, then calmly lowered the veil. "It's you. I must be mistaken." "How can you be mistaken?" he said, recognizing the voice of the intruder from the other night. He sniffed the air. The same scent. Elias grabbed his hand and pulled off the veil. "We've been in bed together countless times. You can't be mistaken." "Don't be ridiculous," Caleb said. "When have we ever?" "We haven't," Elias said, pulling off his headdress and pushing Caleb into the bedding. "But you've forgotten." "I haven't." Caleb panicked. "What are you doing?" Elias smiled. "We have to see your mother tomorrow. We should get some rest. A wedding night is not to be wasted." The next morning, Caleb stared at the sleeping Elias and hugged himself. He should have had the staff throw him out last night. How had he gone along with it? A high-ranking official tricked into a sham marriage. He would be a laughingstock. But the political alliance was secure. And Elias was said to be a favorite of the leader. Maybe his fortunes would turn. But that was a minor detail. What Elias had done was treason. His life was one thing, but dragging Caleb down with him was another. Annoyed, he shook him awake. "Hey, get up. You have to go to work." Elias frowned. Don't I get time off for the wedding? I get time off. Why would you? I married you. I get time off too, Elias mumbled. Have you asked enough questions? Go to sleep. Caleb lay back down, noticing the sheets had been changed. Shouldn't we be having tea with my mother? You go. I'm not going, Elias said flatly. But, shut up. Caleb found himself tracing Elias's eyebrow, muttering, serves you right, you shameless lecher. Theodore turned a blind eye to the situation. The Prescott family was furious but powerless. Elias had no respect for tradition. He refused to have tea with his mother-in-law and even made Caleb serve him at dinner. And every 5 days, he demanded Caleb buy him snacks with his own allowance. If Caleb refused, he would torment him relentlessly. Caleb soon discovered that after Elias had his snacks, his own life became much easier. One day, he came home from a snack run to find Elias brewing and drinking some kind of medicine. He smirked. Serves you right for your debauchery. He started plotting his revenge. Then he saw Elias push up his sleeve, remove a string of prayer beads, and cut his wrist, letting some blood drip into the pot. He saw Caleb and froze. You're back early. The blood was still flowing from his pale wrist. Caleb pulled a ribbon from his hair and tied it around the wound. What are you doing? The last dose, Elias said nonchalantly. It's for you. They said his childhood illness had been cured by a miracle formula. So this was the miracle formula, human blood as an ingredient. Tears welled in his eyes. Who told you to do this? What? Afraid I'll poison you? Elias's eyes glinted with amusement. Or are you worried about me? No wonder this medicine tastes so foul. Caleb cried. Beggars can't be choosers, Elias said with an eye roll. If you're not going to drink it, I'll throw it out. Caleb snatched the bowl from him. It would be a waste to throw it away. He still couldn't remember his past with Elias, though everything felt familiar. Sometimes his mother would hold him and apologize, saying if she'd known it would end up like this, she wouldn't have bothered. Elias would sarcastically agree, and then the two of them would start bickering, and Caleb would have to play peacemaker. The autumn chrysanthemums were beautiful. He finished a painting and picked up one of Elias's. This bird's nest is pretty good. It's a chrysanthemum, Elias said flatly. Oh, Caleb said, mocking him. Well, you're so talented, my dear. I should hang it in our bedroom. After a month of looking at the masterpiece, Elias finally told him with a serious expression, Caleb, throw it away. I admit, it's a bird's nest. He found his old bow in a storage trunk. In the backyard, he struggled to draw it. Husband, Elias's lazy voice came from behind him. You can't even draw this? No wonder your stamina is so poor. It's not about stamina, Caleb retorted. If we were playing marbles, I bet I could beat you. Elias laughed. You're terrible at slingshots too. Caleb pouted. You're no fun. I don't want to play anymore. Elias took his hand. Watch. I'll show you again. An arrow flew through the air. The scene was uncannily familiar. Elias, Caleb said, his voice trembling, I think I remember something. In their 3rd year of marriage, Alara took over as head of the Vaughn family. She turned down numerous suitors. Because his mother was always complaining that they couldn't have children, Elias put her in charge of all their family businesses. The old woman was so busy she had no time to complain. Elias, having been nagged by his mother-in-law, would take it out on him in bed. Caleb would have to apologize on his mother's behalf. It was an exhausting, exquisite torture. One night, half asleep, he heard Elias whisper, Caleb, let's have a child. He mumbled an agreement in his dream. The next day, Elias came home with a beautiful baby boy. His cousin Leo burst in, out of breath. Elias Vaughn, put down my son. Elias, holding the child, hopped onto the garden wall. His name isn't very masculine. Let's call him Rowan. Are you crazy? What does my son have to do with you? Elias held the child up. He's mine now. Call me Dad. The little boy looked at his frantic father below, then sweetly called Elias Dad. Elias nodded. Good boy. Leo was about to throw his shoe at him. You little brat. Who are you calling Dad? Elias, Caleb sighed, you're acting like a child. Give the baby back. Give him back? Elias said. Then you have to give me one. Caleb blushed, hissing through his teeth. Elias, are you drunk? In the end, his grandfather and mother fell in love with little Rowan, and Leo had no choice but to let them be his godfathers. In the fourth year, a delegation came from Europe. An envoy secretly slipped him a letter. He opened it, his eyes fixed on the first line. Caleb, I hope this letter finds you well.